I don't hate him more than I hate anybody else. Or less.
The Kinks are widely thought to be one of the most influential British groups of the 60s, right up there with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Their lyricism, painted with stark English sensibility, coupled with their many influences from classic rock and roll to music hall, had the Kinks capturing the hearts of both listener and critic alike. Despite all the dizzying success though, a fierce sibling rivalry bubbled away in the background between Ray and Dave. A brotherly feud almost foreshadowing the Gallaghers. And like Noel and Liam, it would eventually lead to the group splitting up. Let's explore how this feud began, what impact it had on the band, and we'll talk about the very fresh news that Ray and Dave apparently have 20 new songs ready for a brand new Kinks album. New Kinks music! Hi, I'm Adam. Welcome back to Music Mongoose. Feuds in bands are not new. The Beatles had John versus Paul, the Stones, Mick versus Keith, Pink Floyd, Waters versus Gilmour. But there's something about a sibling rivalry that makes the stakes that little bit higher, because you're not just arguing with a colleague, are you? You're arguing with your own flesh and blood. You're running the risk of making the next Christmas dinner very awkward. Dave and Ray Davies grew up in a family of 8 children. All of their older siblings were girls. So it's easy to see why Dave and Ray formed a special connection early on. By the way, I'm going to address this now. Is it Davies or Davis? Because I swear both of them alternate the pronunciations that they use themselves, so don't be surprised if I do too during this video. Fair warning. Their childhood would be rife with emotional tragedy, laying the foundation for the volatile future they'd have. A day before Ray's 13th birthday, his sister Renee gifted him his very first guitar. That same day, Renee would pass away in a nightclub from heart failure. This would have a particularly profound effect on the already introverted and fragile Ray. Like most brothers, Ray and Dave had their share of fights. In one, Dave remembers knocking Ray down, seemingly out of consciousness. As Dave leaned over to make sure he was alright, Ray got up and punched him square in the face. Sneak attack. Dave said about this episode, "It's symbolic. I felt the pleasure that I'd knocked him over, then concern that I'd hurt him. But all he wanted was to get back at me." And really that could serve as a metaphor for their entire relationship, a constant urge to bring the other down, but with an underlying sense of brotherly care. A constant tension, but mutual respect for each other. Ray once described their relationship like this: "I was the serious, deep-thinking musician, he was this crazed kid playing these amazing guitar riffs." And Dave added this: "The tension was important until it went out of control." The out of control bit we'll get to in a second, but with this you can start to understand the dynamics that this brotherly tension played in the group. Ray, as the primary songwriter and vocalist, kept the Kinks on track, while Dave curated that famous Kinks guitar sound, giving them their trademark edge. Whether they like it or not, their styles were mutually beneficial, albeit volatile. Their brotherly outbursts became part of the daily operation of the Kinks. Their producer, Shel Talmy, once said, talking about when they started fighting, "I'd call a coffee break. The rest of us would go and have a cigarette, and when they were done, we'd come back and start over." Since forming the Kinks in 1963, Ray and Dave became known for their clashing of horns, often fighting before shows. Sometimes these fights spilled into the show and outside of a brotherly squabble. The famous incident in 1965 is a great example of this. At the Capitol Theatre in Cardiff, Dave had an onstage fight with drummer Mick Avery. It resulted in Mick knocking Dave out with a cymbal stand in front of a couple thousand people. And that was a hefty blow too. Dave was rushed to hospital. He had 16 stitches in his head. And the police wanted to talk to Mick for attempted murder. It was a serious incident. But all charges were dropped in the interest of the success of the band. And shortly after that, they would take to America in the British invasion. And that didn't really go too well for them. They ended up getting themselves banned from the entire country. I made a video just about that, by the way. Click the I in the corner to go and watch it. Back to that incident in Cardiff though, Ray would later tell a Welsh media outlet that could have been the end of the Kinks right there. It really had a tremendous emotional effect on me. "My little brother, he's killed my little brother," Ray reportedly screamed while crying on stage. It reminds me of that image from earlier, with one brother standing over the other to make sure they're all right, but this time, Dave wasn't getting up for a sneak attack. After proving to be massive forces, briefly, in the British invasion, the Kinks went on to have a very successful career. despite a small blip in the 70s and never truly returning to their 60s popularity, the group still produced some of the greatest tunes the world would ever hear. This resulted in more fame, more money, and more responsibility. This, in addition to the pressures of touring and writing, took a toll on Ray. He suffered a nervous and physical breakdown in 1966, and 6 years later he attempted to take his own life by taking pills on stage after splitting from his wife. Ray got married in 1964, by the way, and somebody made a total fool of themselves by drinking too much as the best man. You can guess who it was. It was Dave. And I like to think that Ray retaliated in 1997 when he completely smashed Dave's 50th birthday cake. But again, despite all the squabbling, that underlying sense of concern, that image of one brother standing over the other to make sure they're alright, was prevalent. Dave took Ray on holiday to Denmark after the suicide attempt, and there the two reignited their passion for music, reportedly playing Chuck Berry tunes together. Ray would state that this whole episode actually gave the Kinks a new life, despite it almost costing Ray's. The Kinks would continue until around 1996. In 2004, both brothers experienced epiphanies, let's call them. And this was 8 years after the Kinks had split due to the creative differences of the brothers, by the way. You see, Ray was shot during a robbery and Dave suffered a stroke, both in the same year. Rumours of a reunion bubbled from around then, the thought being that both of them had a near-death experience. So this could be a wake-up call to put aside that rivalry and start making music together again. And that's what happened. Sort of. In 2013, Dave would visit Ray's house, and they actually wrote some songs together in the kitchen. However, this collaboration soon fell to pieces again after an old argument about "You Really Got Me" reignited, and the whole thing just fell apart. So close, lads, so close. In 2015, they performed together when Ray made a guest appearance at Dave's solo show in London. And in 2018, rumours began floating about a potential full-scale reunion of the surviving members of the band. Ray has been teasing a new Kinks album for years. Not an anthology or a celebratory re-release of an old album, but an actual new Kinks album with Dave. In November 2023, Ray finally revealed that there are around 20 songs nearly finished for a brand new album. In a recent interview, he said this: "We've got loads of songs there in pieces, about 20. There are about 2 or 3 songs I want to finish, and when they're finished, I'll put the whole thing together." Okay, so it's not like they're in the studio together writing new songs. They're just picking up unfinished demos and finishing them. Will they ever perform live again, though? Ray says it's hard to tell. It all depends on whether he can convince Dave to get on board. "We're just different animals," Ray says. "We found ourselves at a very young age being in each other's faces, and we had to work with it somehow." And they certainly did work with it, didn't they? You could even say the Kinks wouldn't have been as successful if it wasn't for that brotherly tension. In the 90s, of course, a brand new brotherly feud was front and centre with Oasis. You can click the video up here to find out about the time they performed their worst show in history, and I'll catch you next time on Music Mongoose. Okay, bye-bye now.